Will Chainsaw Man Part 2 end anytime soon? Is it shaping up to the finale of the story? Are we going into the final arc or saga or whatever you want to call it? Is the Death Devil the last thing that we will see? I think these are valuable questions. A lot of people have been asking it, and with how the story has been structured so far, it does feel very climatic. That we are kind of entering this final stage of the story as realistically what towers over death. You have someone like Pochita, who is an incredibly powerful individual. You have all the four horsemen coming out to play, and death being this entity that brings forth mass destruction, the age of devils, the end of humanity as you know it. To me, pretty climatic and quite easily something you can build a ton of tension for and bring it to a close very nicely. A lot of people don't like this idea, however. Now, Fujimoto is unpredictable. He does too many things. He's in a very different position compared to a lot of other authors, and that I do agree with. However, we do have some loose indications on how Fujimoto tends to handle his story, and we can look at Fire Punch as a pretty interesting example. This has less than 100 chapters, and the reason I put it like that is that somewhere out there is a statement that I believe says that Tatsuki Fujimoto does not like to write long-running stories, and the number that he usually gives is around 100. Now, I don't know the semantics of that, the specifics, if it's truly legitimate or if it's just a number that he doesn't really want to go over. It sounds kind of weird, but I think Fujimoto is quirky enough of an individual to really stick to that merit. Like anything over 100 chapters, a little bit too long for me, but 99, perfectly fine. I could only assume that if it was necessary for the story to go a little bit past 100 chapters, then he would most likely do it.
Are you going to finish?
Going back to Fire Punch as that example, I would say he cut a lot of corners to end it off. There's probably a ton of different reasonings for that, whether he was clocked out of the story personally, or it wasn't that successful or well received, or maybe he just wanted to move on to something else. You can argue that Chainsaw Man Part 2 is the polar opposite and actually supports the argument that he wants to write a long-running story just within his own vision. Instead of having one consecutive long story with 150, 200 plus chapters, you part it off. We still view it as consecutive chapters, but in his head, when it comes to story arcs, it's most likely Chainsaw Man Part 2, Chapter 1. So you have around 97 chapters for Part 1. We currently have around, I think, 46, close to 50 chapters for Part 2. Is there room for a Part 3? Do me a favor, leave a like and subscribe. Not to scare you, but let me throw out some numbers for you. Early December 2018, Chainsaw Man released. Ended December 14th of 2020. We did not hear from it for about a year and a half until Part 2. That started early mid-July 2022, and obviously we're in October, almost November 2023. So just judging off that scale, mind you, Part 1 is a weekly scale and Part 2 is weekly/bi-weekly. It jumps back and forth whenever needed. One could argue that if we stick to the time frame of what Fujimoto likes to do and how he's already shown to handle his stories, we could expect Chainsaw Man Part 2 to end comfortably around late 2024, potentially more likely 2025. This is completely hypothetical, just based on dates, just based on the experience you have with Fujimoto as an author and him not wanting to get trapped into writing consecutively long stories. Now, this could be completely wrong. This could be thrown completely out the window because he has a lot more freedom now, and that is kind of a luxury for manga authors. They don't tend to get this freedom to be able to create stories or even chapters whenever they kind of feel fit. Fujimoto does not have that complete freedom, but he does have a lot more flexibility compared to other authors where he's able to take breaks very often, change his story into bi-weekly very often, change the length of the actual chapter itself quite often. So sometimes you'll notice it'll be like 15 to 20 pages, sometimes it can be 30 to 40 pages. It's entirely dependent on what the story beats need. He might need a little bit more time to show off Denji, he might need more time to show off Asa, he might be trying to build this or build that, so he allocates time respectfully to whatever in-world story markers actually needed. 2024 seems pretty early. It seems a little bit scary too. I think it is definitely doable if the story switches back to a more regular weekly schedule, but you never really know. It is just around the corner, and potentially only getting at minimum 20 plus chapters seems a little bit difficult to do. So for me, 2025 seems much more of a comfortable bet, most likely towards the end of the year. That would at minimum bring you to around 40 to 50 chapters if it was bi-weekly only, but we know that's not the case. I will say, however, Fujimoto works in mysterious ways. 2024 might sound completely out the window when you hear around 25 chapters. However, the pace that he is working at currently is still rather quick. There's a lot of resemblance to Part 1, just not in the same way that a lot of us are used to. He's in a great position currently with where the story is to really kick off the final arc of the story, or the final section, the final saga, whatever it is. All of his time and attention within it, focusing on Denji, focusing on Naoyuta, the arrival of death, potentially finding power, Denji and Asa's combination / team up. There's so many different things that he has to showcase, but the way he's been going about it lately has been very intricate and slow in a lot of parts when it comes to actually reading the chapter, but the ground that he is covering in total is pretty fun. It was very quick. It has changed our perspective of the story quite drastically, and we now know enough to comfortably move forward into the next phase of the story, potentially its final. I would say currently has to go to 3 different characters: Denji, Naoyuta, and Asa. We're in a very polarizing position with all of them. Denji was very much conflicted, but partially cemented in the idea of not turning into Chainsaw Man, even though people were trying to convince him, even though public safety and Yoshida were threatening him not to. All he was doing was protecting Naoyuta, even though it was going against his own wishes and his own desires to be this person that is praised. This is all getting stripped away. A really hard punch in the gut, funny enough, is the way Naoyuta responds to Denji. Denji claims it to be delusions, that Nostradamus' prophecy isn't a thing, it's not gonna happen, it's mumbo jumbo. But Naoyuta confirms it to be real, and she talks about that in reference to her sisters being Fami, war, and death. This is a big moment for Denji. The way he handles this type of acknowledgement from Naoyuta is kind of either make or break, because we don't really know the semantics of Naoyuta. We know that she's young, we know that she's inexperienced, we know that she's a lot more powerful than she lets on, but Denji's just doing his best to protect her. The problem is Yoshida, public safety, with what Fami's planning. The idea that she crafted is impeccable. To create this artificial, fabricated desire and worship towards Chainsaw Man as an entity, as a thing, as a god even. Funny enough, very similar to Fire Punch and Agni being viewed as a god as well. Only for that godhood to be manipulated, so a devil contract would come into play and turn all the people that worship Chainsaw Man into that representation. They too would turn into Chainsaw Man. They wouldn't harbor realistically his abilities, which is to erase, but they still have the physical appearance. So now this is spread throughout the public, close to around 400,000 people globally. Might not sound like a lot, but is enough to garner a lot of attention and a lot of traction, and that is the point. They want to spread fear to Chainsaw Man. This is also happening with you're probably asking yourself a pretty simple question. Is Fami good? Is Fami trying to save the world? Is she legitimate when she says that she doesn't want the human race to cease to exist? Most likely so. Death seems to be the big bad, the final villain, almost similar to a gun devil. However, we know that there's going to be a personality, an older sister. The question, what is public safety going to do about it? Clearly they're trying to stop Chainsaw Man and War and Asa and Fami and the church in general, yet they still know that death is on its way. I think it's interesting how public safety is moving. They have hybrids, they have weaponry, a massive organization across the globe. They probably won't be able to stop Nostradamus' prophecy unless they want to weaponize Denji himself. Instead of anyone else doing it, public safety will do it, which mimics the whole Makima situation. This doesn't seem to be the case, however, unless we find out that Yoshida wasn't actually trying to kill Asa, but instead take her in to try and manipulate and control her. But then again, wouldn't Yoshida just try to manipulate and take Denji in from the beginning? Why let him roam free? So there's a bit of curiosity, a bit of murkiness there on how they're actually deciding to handle the arrival of death. I would say that they don't want Denji involved at all because he's too much of a liability, and that comes in the form of erasing things from existence. The idea that Denji could accidentally erase death is very scary because you don't really know the semantics of it. If the idea of death, its concept, and whatever the final horseman actually represents in terms of being a horseman and potentially a primal fear at the same time, which would be a first by the way, does that have big implications, big problems, big issues for the world to face? Do you destroy the human race if you get rid of the idea of death? That's the question. What answer can you even give that? Theoretically, I would say yes. You don't want to get rid of the idea of death. You don't want to get rid of the idea of certain elements that are crucial to humanity to exist. If people didn't fear death, there'd be no consequence for it and people would start to drop off like flies. Do you see how convoluted the idea of erasing death truly is? Probably something that is not on Denji's agenda, something that he's not going to face out of his own heart, out of his own goodwill or nature, unless he's protecting someone. Naruto could be that problem. Not because she's not smart or she'd put herself in a weird position, but I can see people trying to leverage her, putting her in danger, trying to provoke Chainsaw Man to come out and play. If Fami was really smart, she would do this, and I wouldn't be surprised if she has something in store for her. But then what about Asa? This first image that was revealed to us when part 2 first launched. She's wielding a weird modification of a chainsaw, so is Asa going to wield Denji eventually? More than likely. And a curveball, just to throw it out there. I wonder if the ability to erase can actually be nullified if you're being wielded by someone else. Instead of the full armor Pochita form we see that we know can erase things from existence, I wonder if it can be kind of pocketed and backseated if Denji is taken control of by Asa and War. Maybe that's Fami's goal. Maybe she's already thought about the problematic nature of trying to erase death, because clearly she wouldn't gun for it if her goal is true, to save humanity. There is many ideas. Denji's fate, for example. Does he live or die? Do we have a happy ending, something that he finally deserves and finds in peace? Or is it just very miserable? What about power? The contract that they made. Is it going to be something that death utilizes, or just something that death brings back as well? We have a lot to go through. And while 2024 seems very early, most likely 2025, somewhere within there, I could see it coming to an end.